Well, 3 years ago, our nation fell victim to a financial crisis that crippled the economy, and we are still recovering from the effects. Now a report has surfaced from a Pentagon subcontractor, raising questions about whether there was financial terrorism behind that meltdown. We wanted to know more, so we called financial analyst Kevin Freeman, who is the author of that report, which is submitted to the Pentagon's Irregular Warfare Support Program. Kevin, thank you so much for being here. You have some disturbing conclusions in here, talking about economic warfare and saying what you found in connection with the 2008 economic meltdown is essentially the equivalent of box cutters on an airplane, and you suspect that economic terrorists had a hand in the recession that followed. How so?
Well, thanks, Megan. Basically, my report was commissioned by the Defense Department in order to study the possibility of whether or not financial terrorism could have played a role in the crash. And what we found was the answer a clear yes. It could have played a role. We don't have definitive proof positive. We pushed for a second phase study, which was never conducted, but we came up with some disturbing possibilities that our economy and our free markets are subject and potentially could be under attack by terrorists.
Who specifically could be behind it?
Well, any number of actors that would like to see the destruction of the U.S. economy. That would include jihadists. Osama bin Laden has said that his purpose of going into the towers in 9/11 was to bring down the American economy. There are a whole host of other Sharia law advocates who have said that they would like to see capitalism replaced by Sharia. We have the Chinese, who wrote a book titled Unrestricted Warfare in 1999, in which they specifically advocated the use of a stock market crash in order to bring the United States to its knees. So there are a number of people. It could be ex-KGB from the Soviet Union and so forth. There's a data trail.
But how could they have done it? Because I think, the conventional wisdom in this country is, you had Fannie and Freddie giving out tons of mortgages that never should have been given out. Then you had the Wall Street folks trading these so-called credit default swaps, basically doubling down on these bad investments. And ultimately, things just started to implode in a way where, we had to step in. The government bailed out those banks, and we all know, the history that happened after there. How could jihadists, how could the Chinese, the Russians have influenced that?
Well, it's possible to trade on our exchanges without us knowing who's doing it. There are mechanisms called dark pools, and their credit default swaps don't have paper trails that you can follow. So it's possible that they could have used the very mechanisms that you described, and they could, a relatively small amount of money, measured in the billions or tens of billions, could have been sufficient to bring a $50 trillion tragedy to our markets. Clearly, we were vulnerable. I mean, the FCIC report showed that there were extraordinary vulnerabilities in our system, from the debt, subprime mortgages, and so forth. The question is, were we pushed? And was it possible to do? Absolutely. Hedge funds operating out of the Cayman Islands that are funded from China, or sovereign wealth funds in the Middle East, could very easily have bid up the price of credit default swaps. They could have short-sold stocks, either naked short-selling or direct short-selling.
Why would China want to bring down our economy when we're a huge debtor to them?
And that's an interesting question. And I'm not suggesting that they did, but I will observe, before the market crash, the best estimate was that Chinese economy would overtake the U.S. economy in 50 years. Immediately following the crash, Jim O'Neill at Goldman Sachs said it'll happen in the next 20 years. Last week, Citigroup said China will overtake the U.S. in 10 years. Chinese have a very long-term view. Their intention, they are very public in saying their intention is to be the world's dominant economy and the world's dominant military. So if you take a long-term view, you could attack the United States. Certainly you would suffer loss, but they've certainly rebounded faster than we have, and their economy on a relative basis is much stronger than it was before the market crash.
I need a quick answer to this question, so we're short on time, but I want to ask you, you say that the attack, to the extent they're involved, you say it was a three-phase attack, and we're actually currently in the middle of phase 3. It's ongoing. What under this theory could they be doing right now?
Well, phase 1 was the ramp in oil prices. Phase 2 was the attack on the stock market. Phase 3 would be the attack on the currency and the removal of the dollar as global reserve currency. And it's a natural thing, because our response to the economic crisis was more government debt. That puts our dollar at risk, and that puts the possibility that the U.S. reserve currency status is removed, which would eliminate our ability to respond to a future crisis as we did.
The final thing is apparently the senior Pentagon policymakers have blocked further study. And according to one senior official, nobody wants to go there. They don't want to hear anything more about this theory, Kevin, as disturbing as it is. But I know you're not going to stay quiet, so we'll see if there's any follow-up. Sir, all the best to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Megan. I appreciate it.